and Director.
Thank you so much, Laura. Aloha, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us on this Sunday. Hoping you're having a good day and keeping cool here. Thanks for joining us for our presentation for our energy security and waste reduction plan draft discussions. The whole intent is for us to get feedback from the community on this plan that we put together to ensure that when we finalize this for this first year, we have a plan that we can all follow. To remind everybody, this plan is something that we're going to be updating every year as more information and more technology becomes available for us. So it's a living document that we'll keep updating throughout. Next slide, please. Sorry, yeah, perfect. So today we're gonna walk through that draft plan. We'll talk about what we based the plan on, and we looked at all three of our major programs, our surface transportation, aviation, and marine transportation portion. And we also looked at on our administrative side to see how we could make sure that we could maximize our energy efficiency and minimize waste that we put out through our businesses, and of course the industries that are supported by it. I think everybody should understand that this plan was put together based on the laws that we got to follow. We have 2030 and 2045 clean energy goals set by legislature and approved by our governors that we're all following. We set this plan on a linear path to make sure we can hit our metrics. That's what the plan is doing. We're making sure that we follow up now to see what we may be missing, what other opportunities we may have to ensure that we can get there most efficiently. Next slide, please. Three things that we looked at on ensuring that we base this plan on good data and good science and good practicality. First, we made sure that we're looking at reducing our emissions, making sure that we're as clean as possible in all of our businesses. Second, we're looking at making sure we protect our energy, protect the ways that we can produce energy here locally. We know that we're the most fuel dependent or imported fuel dependent state in the nation. And we're trying to cut ourselves back from that to ensure that we're producing some of our own energy more efficiently and cleaner to protect our society and, of course, to protect our national security as we have our INDOPACOM here in Hawaii. I want to make sure that as we move forward with this plan, affordability is a big piece. As we set these tenets of this plan, we're going to be looking at what economic impacts we'll have. We all feel, and we all see from the data that we have, that at the end of this 2045 piece, energy will be cheaper for us. We all know that there's going to be more expensive, or there's reasons for things to be more expensive as we move forward because there's going to be changes in the way we power things. We want to make sure that we're looking at what those impacts are going to be, positive and negative, and maximize this plan to ensure that everybody can still afford to live in Hawaii. Next slide, please. I'll turn this one over to Laura now, who can kick this off from here. Laura, please.
Aloha, everyone. So our energy security plan didn't just start from this year forward. It's really building upon the work that many in Hawaii, within Hawaii Department of Transportation and in our partner agencies and in many industries and the public have been doing for many years. Through those efforts, we have been able to make some great progress. So as many of you know, Hawaii has a really high adoption rate of electric vehicles. We have one of the highest in the nation's rates for adoption of rooftop solar and have seen some really exciting clean energy projects come online. This is a picture on the bottom left of our solar at the Daniel K. Inouye International Airport. Hawaii is also a leader through our HDOT Highways program and installation of NEVI public electric vehicle chargers. We've had new bicycle paths put in for different transportation options, and there's a lot that's on the horizon for our state in the future, such as renewable diesel expected to come online by the end of this year. Next slide. And we are doing this energy security plan now because we know that even with all of these tremendous efforts happening to reduce emissions, we still have about half of the emissions in the state coming from the transportation sector. And so we want to just keep moving those numbers down. Next slide. the Navahine and Hawaii Department of Transportation settlement in 2024, we're building on that. That settlement really asked the department to follow the existing state statutes that require everyone and all agencies to achieve the 2030 and 2045 emission reduction benchmarks that Director Sniffen mentioned. The settlement acknowledges that HDOT cannot do this work alone and that we'll need everyone, including the legislature, our agency partners, industry, and everyone on this call, the whole public, to contribute. Next slide. So the plan requirements are for a comprehensive statewide plan that reduces emissions from Hawaii's transportation sector and in alignment with the timeline of our existing state laws. So the existing state law, HRS 225P5, requires that all sectors reach a 50% reduction in emissions levels from the 2005 levels, and that we hit that benchmark by 2030, and that Hawaii as a whole achieves net negative emissions by 2045, which means that by 2045, we should be capturing more carbon than we emit. And there are a number of other state laws that we are trying to be in compliance with as in our energy security plan. Next slide. And so this is the timeline that we have been following. We're in the public comment period now until the end of the month, and we'll publish a final plan after integrating all of your feedback by October 15th. And like Director Sniffen said, this is a plan that we'll be constantly updating as we have new resources available to us, new technologies, even cleaner sources of fuel, and new clean energy projects coming onto the grid. So we have made a commitment to revise our plan annually for at least the first 5 years. And we will be starting work on our first revision almost as soon as we publish the final draft of the first edition. Next slide. This is a summary slide of how we're going to reduce emissions with all the modes of transportation combined. So the line at the top in dotted orange shows our projected status quo emissions if we don't take additional steps. So it's not an increase predicted, but it also won't get us to the 2030 and 2045 state benchmark shown in yellow stars here. And so we need to take on new strategies throughout the transportation sector and other sectors as well. And for transportation, those are really broken down into 3 categories. In green are clean fuels, in blue is electrification, and in pink is our fuel demand strategies, such as alternative modes of transportation. And that won't get us to the 2030 and 2045 goals, even though those strategies are aggressive. And so we're going to be balancing that with carbon removals from things like native reforestation. Next slide. And so we have some priority actions across all modes. The first is finding the right legislative low carbon fuel framework for Hawaii, taking into account affordability and balancing the pillars of the plan that Director talked about throughout all of our modes as much as we can to increase the use of electric vehicles and electric equipment, investing immediately in proven techniques to remove carbon from the atmosphere, such as native reforestation and coastal wetland restoration, and then integrating our decarbonization goals early on at the start of project planning and also in funding prioritization. And next, I'll turn over to Deputy Director Robin Shishido.
Hi, thanks, Laura. Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Again, I'm Robin with the HDOT Highways, and I'll talk about in more detail on our ground transportation and the top 3 strategies identified in order to meet the goals and targets set. So first off, we have increased the use of electric vehicles statewide. Second, we have expanding transportation choices. And third is the use of low carbon fuels for heavy duty trucks. Next slide. So for electrification, we've identified benchmarks. In 2030 is to have all battery electric vehicles, or 81% of all battery electric vehicles for new light duty sales. In 2035, we have 100% transition for all state and county fleets. And in 2035, then having 100% of new light duty vehicle sales be battery electric. And some of the strategies, in order to meet these benchmarks is build out the public EV charging. And this is, involving of what private will do and also what the state and counties can do. So it's a combined effort by everybody. And some other things looked at is also incentive programs on, having people convert their ICE vehicles to EVs, whether it's, turning over their ICE and converting, or, maybe some legislation for registration reduction. And also working with transportation network companies such as Lyft and Uber and car rental fleets, transitioning also to EVs. And lastly, like I mentioned, it's just having all the county and state light duty fleets being converted to EV. Next slide, please. So, looking at the public infrastructure, the IIJA, or the Infrastructure and Investment Jobs Act, it provided Hawaii DOT with a little over 17 million to build out a charging network statewide. And so far, we have built 2 charging stations, one on Maui and one on Oahu. And later this year, we're going to get started on the remainder of our charging stations, which will add 2 in Kauai Island, 5 on Hawaii Island, 1 more on Oahu, and 1 more on Maui. But like I mentioned before, besides what we provide, we also need to rely on a private and the counties to also expand their networks. Next slide, please. Looking at multimodal, so a benchmark set, in 2030, 5% vehicle miles traveled reduction, 2035 have a 10% reduction, and then 2040 with a 15% reduction, and 2045 with a 20% reduction. But when we talk about, vehicle miles traveled reduction, we're not telling everybody to get out of their vehicles, but instead, we're making sure that there's choices for others. And part of the settlement was for us to complete the multimodal network within 5 years. That's kind of filling in the gaps for the bicycle and pedestrian facilities. But other strategies, to look at is incentivizing folks, to use the public transit, having more bus stops and so forth, or maybe some incentives for employees to use bike. Also looking at other things like ride sharing. Recently, HDOT, we relaunched our ride sharing website, so folks can go on there, connect with others, and they can share a ride and not have to always drive themselves in a single vehicle. Other things looked at, maybe congestion pricing and revising parking standards. Next slide. So, as I mentioned, as part of the settlement, we have the requirement to complete the multimodal network over the next 5 years. And we worked with all the counties and looked at our state bike and ped network, and we overlaid them to identify where the gaps are. And those are the projects that we'll be pushing forward here in the next 5 years. So that will probably equate to somewhere between $40 to $60 million in those types of projects over this next 5 years in order to complete that. And also putting money into the public transit. Next slide, please. The last strategy is clean fuels. And benchmark set is 2030, have a 2 to 4% increase of clean freight vehicles. And 2045, having 100% use of clean freight vehicles. And strategies for this is to ensure that there is an infrastructure for clean fuel access by both public and the industry. As I mentioned earlier, transitioning state fleets and our state fleets to EVs, alternative fuels, by 2026, and also having all other state and county agencies convert their vehicles to EVs and alternative fuels. Next slide, please. So looking at clean fuels, mainly it's talking about biodiesel, renewable diesel, and ethanol. And here's kind of an estimate over the next when we get to 2045. So in 2030, what the estimated demand will be, and then in 2045. And primarily, this is for the heavy duty vehicles and, being able to just use a cleaner fuel and reduce emissions. And with that, I'll turn it over to Deputy Director Khalidi for the maritime discussion.
Thank you, Robin. For maritime, we have 4 strategies, which we'll present this afternoon, and they are generally segregated between our cruise ship operations as well as our cargo operations. And so just at the very high level, the strategies include reducing cruise ship operations. And then for cargo, which is the remaining 3 strategies, we're looking to adopt renewable and biodiesel fuels for our inter-island operations, and then looking to other fuels like LNG for interstate. That has actually already been started. And then the last is for the vessels that just remain in a port, such as our tugs and other similar vessels, looking at adopting other fuels. Next slide. So around this idea of reducing fuel demand and reducing cruise operations, we have looked at benchmarking every 5 years. So 5 years from now, in 2030, we'll look at reducing all port calls from non-home ported vessels down to 50% of its current call number. 10 years from now, or in 2035, we'll be reducing total cruise ship calls by 50%. And then in 2040, we will basically only be supporting only home ported cruise calls in our commercial ports. But I want to be very clear that these reductions are for vessels that are emitting greenhouse gas emissions. So we have been following some of the IMO goals that have been set out, as well as some of the commitments made by the Cruise Lines International Association. We know that cruise lines are making efforts to decarbonize their operations, but we are also not seeing the benefit of that decarbonization in our ports here in Hawaii. A lot of the vessels that call here currently are older vessels that are not equipped with any means to reduce those emissions. So these benchmarks are going to be targeted at vessels that are, 1, not home ported, and 2, not equipped with any emission reduction or reducing equipment. And then moving on the next slide to our cargo operations. So at a very high level, we talked about adoptions of new and cleaner fuels. And here are the benchmarks that we've set out for the different vessel types that are either doing inter-island, intra-island, or staying within interstate and then staying within the commercial ports, based on what we expect for fuel production and fuel availability, as well as any retrofitting or new vessel builds to accommodate the new clean fuels. And just in general, right, the high points for the strategy are adopting these clean fuels, whether they're biodiesel or other alternative clean fuels, and LNG. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kurt, our deputy for airports.
Thank you, Dre. Good afternoon, everyone. Kurt Optogro, Deputy Director for Airports. This afternoon, we're going to be presenting our top 3 strategies, as you see on the slide: use of sustainable aviation fuel, or what we refer to as SAF, electrification of our airfields, ground and terminal access, and ramp efficiency, which is on the airfield in front of the terminals, to get our equipment and things through more efficient optimization plan. So on the next slide, we're covering the clean fuels. And sustainable aviation fuel, or SAF, is really a lower carbon alternative aviation fuel compared to conventional jet fuels made from non-fossil fuel sources. So the main challenge in SAF is the cost to produce as well as to supply. It may be between 3 to 5 times more expensive today. So the legislation and regulatory support is essential to expand the use of SAF through tax credits, incentives, and the like. What you see are 2 scenarios: the Hawaii Law and the National SAF Challenge. So the Hawaii Law, net negative emissions by 2045, and for the National SAF Challenge, we have same targets achieved by 2050. The industry does need the tax credits for SAF productions, as I mentioned. So we plan to work with the SAF coalition to build a more diverse coalition to determine the appropriate SAF benchmarks, enact legislation, measure and achieve the benchmarks set forth by the coalition. We'd like to work with the industry for clean fuel standards, build more supply and distribution chains for clean fuels, and of course, for the longer term, continue research, R&D work for alternative fuel sources like eSAF and hydrogen. On the next slide, we cover electrification. And so by 2035, we plan to work with the car rental agencies and encourage a 50% conversion to EV vehicles. By 2045, we want to convert, or the plan would call for converting all of our ground support equipment, GSE equipment at the airports to EV. Those are all the trucks that you would see as a passenger on the airfield by the gates. We'll support R&D for electric aircraft, ground service, electrified ground service equipment at airports to power the planes when they're at the gates, continued conversion of LED apron, runway and taxiway lighting, convert mobile equipment to EV, explore rideshare and taxi partnerships, and create the partnerships that or strengthen really the partnerships that we currently have with our car rental agencies. The last slide that I want to present is really on ramp efficiency and fuel demand reductions. So by 2045, our targets are to reduce idling fuel flow by 18% throughout our airport system. And we would achieve that through less idling on the taxiways, as we refer to as ramps. We would work with the FAA to modernize airspace, deploy technologies like performance-based navigation, or PBN, to help reduce congestion in the airspace coming into Hawaii. We want to optimize aircraft movements on the taxiways and ramp to prevent any congestions and delays. We will explore on-site renewable power, and of course, work with all of our airport tenants and concessions to adopt and comply with our emission reduction policies. With that, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Deputy Director Lee, who will present administrative strategies.
Thank you so much, Deputy Director Otsuburo. Tammy Lee, Deputy Director for the administration. So the first slide is about our reduction strategies from the administration's perspective. On the top there, showing some key benchmarks. We'll be working with the legislature during the next legislative session on some clean energy security bills. We're also going to be developing a clean fuel standard or an alternative legal framework to reduce emissions, which I'll talk about in the next slide. There in the purple are policy and implementation strategies, both internal, previous slide, still on the previous slide. Thank you. Both internal with our HDOT teams and with our external partners. We developed an impact tool to estimate the short and long-term emissions associated with our maintenance and construction projects. This tool will be used to inform the evaluation, scoring, and prioritization of our projects in our planning. We've started the transition of our fleet to electric vehicles. We started this in 2021, so we're well on our way. We're keeping our youth council engaged through touchpoint collaborations throughout the year. Next slide. So an example of the administration's reduction strategy is development of a clean fuel standard. Our energy security plan relies on transitioning to clean fuels, but faster local production or importation requires some financial incentives for low carbon fuels and disincentives for high carbon fuels. We'll be conducting a feasibility study to evaluate a Hawaii-specific clean fuel standard or alternative legal framework, assessing the potential impact on our affordability for our community. A clean fuel standard incentivizes fuel companies to produce and sell lower carbon fuels, reducing the carbon intensity of our transportation fuels and dependency on petroleum. We need production, blending, and import incentives similar to those in California and Washington states to compete in the clean fuels market. Next slide. So on the top there, some of our carbon sequestration initiatives. These initiatives not only contributes to the reduction of emissions, but also adds to the reduction in fire risks, endangered species protection, cleaner air, and more. That QR code there on the left, on the bottom, will take you to our native planting page, where we track our own native planting statewide. To date, we've planted over 4,200 native plants. Our website includes an interactive map, as well as the types of native plants. And now I would like to introduce Derek Takeno, our Hawaii Youth Transportation Council member. Derek is a student at the University of Hawaii Maui College, and he will share the council's role and insights from a youth council member perspective.
Aloha everyone. I am a member of the Hawaii Youth Transportation Council. So this council represents a diverse group of youth voices from across the state, and of different ages as well. We were selected from 20 of us were selected from a pool of 83 to serve 1 year or 2 year terms. Next slide, please. This council allows Hawaii's youth to find their voice on issues that will impact our future. Personally, I wish that I had gotten involved when I was younger. And I know that this council is a great opportunity to help people who are help younger youth kind of find their voice and get involved in something real and make that world that they want to live in. So yeah, that's all from me on this.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Derek. So as we talked about, you heard the tenets and the base of our plan so far. And you heard from our partners in the Youth Council who are going through the plan, making sure that they go through the review process and feeding into the content of the plan. Right now we have our schedule for the plan. By August 31st, we'll finish up our public presentations and public comment. And we'll take those comments in. We'll make sure we post the comments that we've gotten so far and how we address them, either with inclusion or with exception, on our website to ensure that everybody can see exactly how we went through the process to finalize this plan by October 15th. Again, once we finalize the plan, it gives us this framework or this process that we can all work with other agencies to ensure that we can move everything forward to reach the 2030 and 2045 clean energy goals that were set forth by our legislature and by our governors. It's also going to allow us the process to reconsider all of the tactics and the tenets that we put into the plan as we move forward, so we can make sure that things are more efficient and more cost effective for all of our residents of Hawaii. That's what we have for the presentation so far. Next slide, please. We're going to open up for comments now, or questions and comments from the community. We have our 4 deputies, program managers here to answer questions. And we also have Laura and her group who are running the coordination and the collaboration on this plan to answer any questions. Laura, please.
Yeah, thank you, Director. So the floor is open. We planned these sessions so they could just be an open conversation for anyone to ask questions, give feedback. We would love to hear what people like in that they're hearing from our presentation, or for those that have had a chance to read the plan. We also want to hear if there's any strategies that are missing or anything that you have concerns about. So, please go ahead and either raise your hand, or this is a smaller group here, so please feel free to come on video and unmute and ask your question or provide your comment. Does anyone have any questions for Director Sniffen or any of the deputies? Go ahead, Curtis.
I am just having trouble getting my screen all set. Thank you all for having this presentation. I believe it's been one of many. I'm Curtis Chi. I'm with MCNA, and my division actually is with the cruise ships. And something that Deputy Director Kalili Dre had said in her presentation was that she is not seeing decarbonization here in Hawaii. We're still seeing the older vessels. With the plan as such, and with such little time for it to become finalized, is there still time for the industry to change, to make the efforts to start to have the newer vessels appear, rather than have it in the plan that this phase out of cruise ships is inevitable? So that's my question, is there's, as she states, there is, we're not seeing those vessels here yet. Is there a chance for us to have those vessels appear?
Thanks, Curtis. Really good question, and really love the way you stated it. This is the first time in the 4 meetings that we've done so far that somebody has asked the question the way that you did. What Dre had said was, when we talked to CLIA, not only did we not see those newer vessels coming to Hawaii, there were no commitments that were made. That was the difficulty for us. When we started asking about what we could be doing, or what this plan could show over time, with newer cruise ships coming in to replace the older to reduce emissions, the industry couldn't give us any commitments. They would not give us anything to say by this date, we expect to have this many percentage of the cruise ships changing out. That's why the plan was set the way it was. If we can get more discussions with the cruise ship industries to understand what the intent is for the improvements of the vessels as we move forward, there's definitely a possibility we could adjust the plan as we're moving forward. But at this time, if there's no commitments made on what those adjustments could be, we would go in with this plan the way it is right now. Again, that being said, though, if the plan is finalized this year in the way that it is, we'll still update it for next year to ensure that we include any additional or better improvement or more improvements to technology here, or better cruise ships, or reduced emissions from the industry. Jerry, you want to add anything?
Thanks, Ed. I really just want to emphasize that the reductions are for vessels that are still emitting greenhouse gases, right? So if we have vessels starting to come to our commercial ports and calling it Hawaii ports that, are clean, then, they can come every day if they wanted to, right? I know that's not how you guys set your itineraries, but that's what we want to be very clear on. And just to add on to what Ed was saying, as we monitor both the goals and the targets that IMO are setting and CLIA are setting, there's no teeth and there's no penalty, right, if those targets aren't met. And so we were hesitant to tie our strategies to their strategies, like as far as timing, because one, our state law requires a little more aggressive timing than what those organizations are setting. But I think if we don't meet our goals, right, we have very real penalties that we are dealing with. And so I think in the next 20 days or so that the comment period is still open, we are hoping to see feedback from this industry to say, hey, here's where we think it might be a more reasonable approach while getting to zero emissions for the cruise industry by 2045. I don't think we've seen that yet in the comments that have come in to date, but we're hoping that that's what we, like a concrete plan, like maybe that 50% reduction isn't quite on target for 2035 or 2030. And if that's the case, we want to know, like, what should we be considering? And so I hope that just gives a little more context to what we're looking at and what we're hoping to receive in the comment period.
Thank you both. Actually, those are very, actually, a little bit of positivity. In a short window, we have some homework to do, so, but good to hear. Thank you.
Thanks, Curtis.
Thank you, Curtis. Anyone else have a question or a comment? Oh, Luke. Go ahead, Luke.
Aloha, everyone. I'm actually here in support of Derek and the DOT. I am the vice chairperson of the Hawaii Youth Transportation Council. And regarding the plan, I have a question about geothermal power and geothermal resources. It only shows up, according to Marcus, it only shows up about 3-ish times in the plan, in which one of the times is indigenous geothermal resources. So I was wondering if we could have someone expand a bit on how you are planning to use geothermal resources in the future.
Laura, can you take that one?
Sure. Yeah, I guess geothermal right now, you're right, Luke, it's not a large part of our plan. And similarly, we don't go into specifics on, wind versus solar and all types of clean energy, right? We're really looking at how do we align our plan with the mandates on the local utilities. And there is that mandate to reach 100% renewable energy by 2045. And so, where that new renewable energy is coming from, it could be geothermal, it could be wind, it could be solar, it could be other technologies that come on board. Locally produced fuels is in our plan, right? But I think for the transportation sector, there's less of a tie-in to those specifics. And, for DOT, we're not in the business of geothermal exploration. So we're just supporting alignment with our state clean energy goals.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Luke, for the question. Any other questions or comments? Maybe while folks are thinking about whether to ask a question or make a comment, I will just note, I put in chat I'm sure you all have it already if you found yourself to this presentation, but I put in chat the link to the Energy Security Plan website. There is a public comment form on that website where you can comment about specific mode strategies. There's also an email listed, h.energysecurity@hawaii.gov, where you can email in your comments, and there's also our contact information. So if you feel like calling and talking to someone, providing your comments, you can do it that way as well. And letters passed along to the director are passed along to everyone involved so that we can get responses to those as well. So there's multiple avenues for your public comment by the end of the month.
I just had one more question. I'm sorry, as you're wrapping up.
Please, go ahead.
The question goes back to Cruz. Within the draft, it had talked about a limitation on the 3,000 passenger vessels or bigger. Us in the industry are trying to understand how did that number come about, or is something about the size of a vessel or stating the size of a vessel irrelevant if it's really about the emissions? But we were wondering where the 3,000 threshold came from.
Go ahead, please.
So as we were doing our research, and we're researching the vessels that come to our ports currently, right? Because we didn't want to chase hypothetical scenarios that aren't real in our facilities. So we looked at the projected emissions for each vessel that comes to Hawaii. And we noticed that there's like a sharp increase once there's a vessel size increase. And so we could have done it by gross tonnage. We could have done it by a number of other metrics. But just looking at the data that was available to us, we looked at the passenger count. And again, this is something that we are hopeful that the industry will give us feedback on. Maybe we've picked the wrong threshold in terms of the metric, right? If we should go by gross tonnage, and you guys are looking at the vessels that come to our ports and look at a different, hey, there's different point of departure here for vessels and their emission footprint, I think we're open to considering that. We were just, when presented with the data available, it looked like there was a clear line of demarcation there.
So your data did, or the research team did look at a multitude of different vessels. It wasn't just the Pride of America that they were doing studies on. They did look at all.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So we looked at actual vessels, like the specific vessels that call at our ports, starting from 2019. We may have gone as far back as 2018, understanding that the disruption to cruise industry and calls during pandemic, for 2020 through, I think, all the way through 2023. And then we looked at data for 2024, and we even looked at the ships that have planned calls to our ports in the next at least year and maybe 2 years. And so again, looking at the exact ships, looking at their age, looking at their size, looking at their passenger count, and that's how we arrived at that cutoff.
So again, we have homework to do. If we can find larger vessels that do meet the emission standards to come this way and swap them out, that would work. Okay, thank you.
Although I will respond and say, if the vessels are too large and can't fit at our facility, right, just length and in the turning basin and everything, I mean, that just presents a whole other constraint. But yes, I mean, if you have data or specific vessels that you can show us, like, hey, you know what, these exceed that passenger count, but they're actually cleaner than, smaller vessels, like, we are absolutely open to considering how to shape the policy based on some of these outliers from the data that we're looking at.
Okay, very good. Yeah, so from the work that we do as MCNA, we'll definitely be working to help get more data and research and sent your way so we can have a positive outcome for us. Thank you.
That would be very beneficial for all of us. Thank you.
Thanks, Curtis. Anyone else with a comment or question? Okay, I'm not seeing any, so this might be our shortest meeting yet. We can let everyone return to their Sunday. Over to you, Director.
Awesome. Thanks, Laura. And thanks to all the program managers for being on. And thanks to the Student Council for being on as well. Really appreciate all of you. Appreciate all the community who jumped on to listen in on the discussions and give us feedback. We want to make sure we take your feedback in so we can respond to it and make this plan better for everybody. So really appreciate your input. We'll be doing 2 more of these prior to finalizing our draft at the end of October, so we can move this plan forward. The whole intent, of course, is to, again, make sure that we have a framework by which we can all follow, that we can collaborate in our industries to ensure that we can hit our 2045 and 2030 clean energy goals as set forth by the legislature and our administrations. Love to see more comments coming through, so please don't think this is your last opportunity. But with that, thank you very much and really enjoy your Sunday. Thank you.
Mahalo, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Mahalo, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you and aloha.